obviously the valuation came across because of the focus on the bottom line, really speaking. And that would have been a significant moment of pride for you as well as your partners, right? An organization that you built, that you amalgamated into another entity, and then you obviously successfully took it to the point where you had a very successful exit out of that. So tell us how did that really come across, if any of those information you want to share with our folks here?
Yeah, I mean, we were debating, the company had grown significantly. We were looking at that point in time to say, we have now two paths. We could either sell or we could continue the ride and get do an IPO of the business. The IPO story, unfortunately, we were always a bit late. When we were 100 million in size, it looked like the IPO was being done at 250 million. When we were 250 million, it looked like the IPO story was getting to be $1 billion. So we were, a little bit behind all of this thing. And the Headstrong was actually a point solution. We were actually an application player. And by that time, the customers were actually looking for complete solutions. So in our space, if you were actually dealing with settling a trade derivative, the customer really didn't care what application we chose, what platform we chose, what process we chose, or what strategy we adopted. So they really said, hey, my cost of settling a trade today is X. How do I lower the cost of that trade? I don't care whether you rejigger my application or the network or the operations and all that. So we realized that distinct lines that had existed when we started the business were starting to get morphed. And for us to be relevant there, we had to play across the broader spectrum. So we went out and thinking that either a strategic buyer would buy, who doesn't have this piece, or a private equity player would actually put money into us and then allow us to do the second round. And it became, again, in a short span, it became quite apparent that the strategic guys were missing this piece. They were heavily dependent. Banks forever have actually been at the leading, if not bleeding edge, of doing technology adoption. And we always used to say that 9 of the top 10 banks on Wall Street were large customers of Headstrong. So we had a very, very marquee customer list that any of these other players wanted to get into and would have given an arm and a leg to get into. So that's how the whole process actually went, where a few PE guys and a bunch of strategic buyers came to the table, and eventually Genpact made the right deal. We felt that they would take care of our employees, they take care of our customers, and Headstrong would sit well in the Genpact portfolio, best amongst everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, by the time we had reached about 4,000 people and 100 plus customers, so obviously it was a significant responsibility for you. And I loved what you shared with me in terms of how it was not just about the founders who really, it's not just about the benefit that came across to the founders, but how did you ensure that the benefit of the acquisition came across to so many more senior people. So shares with us, how is it that, globally in the US and India, right, how did you really ensure that people who were with you and who supported the entire organization beyond ESOPs, right? I think you went beyond just ESOPs that they had the benefit of, and you gave them additional bonuses.
Yeah, I think this is something that, we come from an industry that has a very different mindset. And I don't mean to by any way belittle traditional industries, but traditional industries have a traditional thinking. So if I was a steel manufacturer or any of those things, I have a very different kind of thinking. I think the IT business is a knowledge-based industry, and therefore you value the people, because that every day, as people say, your assets walk out of the door every day, and so you have to rely for them to come back next day. So while founders and promoters do definitely take disproportionate amount of risk, but they do also get a disproportionate amount of reward. However, I think one of the things that all of you have to remember is that sometimes our ego gets ahead of us and we say, we did everything, but really it's not us. Or we may have been perhaps the seed there, but really the teams are the ones that did everything. So one thing we did was really, when we talk about how the creation of wealth happens and then the distribution of wealth, we said that not the founders or the senior management team, but about 25 people in the US, we gave deal bonuses of over $1 million to them. Or 40 people in India, again, not the senior management team, or the founders, but in India, we said to them a crore of deal bonus that we gave to these 40 people and like that. And I think really what we have done is we've built, you know, a sharing ecosystem where they know that tomorrow when we start another venture, that they believe in not just the journey that we're going to undertake from an ethical perspective, but also in the wealth creation and the wealth sharing perspective. So that's an important aspect as well. You know, whether you will make wealth or not is not the important part, but that you demonstrate that you're willing to share it. If you do, that's an important part of it.
So out of curiosity, did you spawn off many entrepreneurs out of your own exit after Headstrong? Did a lot of the employees or people who work with you, did they spin off companies of their own?
Well, some of them have, yes, some of them have, not immediately, but some of them have actually had very, very successful companies. In fact, I'm going to Chennai from here, and I'm actually going to meet one of them in Chennai. He is coming down from the UK, so there are a bunch of those people. I'm very proud of that. You know, I mean, this is one thing I take a moment to talk about Thai, is that, you know, we talk about fostering entrepreneurship. This is our way of really looking and saying that how entrepreneurship got fostered, and the people inside are doing this thing. So for some of them, we are actually investors. We think this is a good vehicle to get back into that.
So, excellent. So that also brings us to where you are today now, Solmark, right? A company which 6 of you have come together out of Headstrong and formed. And tell us about the work that you do in Solmark, and what are the kind of companies that you look at, and how is it that you really work with these companies? Because you have a very interesting perspective in terms of how do you work with these companies. So I'm sure the audience would love to hear that.
You know, I mean, I think we had a choice at that point in time after we sold Headstrong, was that should we do another startup or should we, you know, do something else? And the startup world is no doubt a tough world. It's fully dedicated. You have to have this junoon, you know, there's madness on your head to have that thing. So we said that one thing is that there are brighter, better, faster, smarter, younger people out there who can, you know, run faster, better than us. And what we have is that we have capital now available with us. So instead of, like one of my friends actually told me this thing. He said, yeah, instead of being the horse, why don't you become a jockey? I think really what he meant was, instead of being the donkey, why don't you become the jockey? He was just being, he was humoring me actually at that point in time, just being nice to my ego by calling me a horse instead of a donkey.
You know, everybody would hope, you know, that you can become a donkey like this and have successful exits, right? All of us would love to be donkeys like that. Yes.
But we then decided that we'll instead, you know, start a fund, and we call it a private equity fund for entrepreneurs. And what we have is really, we have some capital. We have a very strong Rolodesk. About 60 to 80,000 people have worked for us over the years, of which I would say about 5 to 10,000 very good managers are there. We've worked in, most of our businesses are across the globe, so there's a very strong geographical footprint. You know, last company we bought is a company that's based out of Vienna, Austria. They only work actually in continental Europe, a little bit in the UK, but they don't do anything in the US, they don't do anything in Asia Pac, they don't do anything in Australia. So we have the ability to actually help these people grow and establish a larger footprint. So that's what Solmark is doing. Solmark is actually, we are backing enterprises that are there in the 50 to 100 million range. We think that they, in our own experience, this is the valley of death or a graveyard that you hit. The entrepreneur has been able to build a business, get to 50, 100 million. And at that point in time, the methods, the standards, you know, how you approach business, which is largely entrepreneurial up until then, has to shift a little bit into organizational building, etc. So we've seen that, we've suffered, we've got a lot of, you know, battle scars to show for that. So we're saying, hey guys, don't make that mistake, learn from us, we can teach you and we can actually help you cross over that chasm. So that's what Solmark is all about. We've done, you know, 6 investments so far. It's early days. The fund just started in 2014, so I don't have an exit number to tell you at the moment of where these are. We don't do mark to market, so it's not like I can tell you, you know, artificial returns are either in terms of what it is. And I'd hate to say today, given with the stock markets and how things are planning out right now, I don't know how do you do mark to market. But it's a great journey. We're enjoying it. We work with the management teams. And the thing is that it's diversity of interest. I have a medtech company. I have a customer experience management company. We have a reference data company. So we have a legal process outsourcing company. So yeah, every day you go for one board meeting or you